Oh, Amy, you coming? Hey, thanks for having us out.
Thank you.
Hey, really?
Yeah.
Another Henry.
Henry.
Yeah.
Hi.
So we call ours Henzo sometimes.
Henzo, yeah.
You're welcome to use it.
All right.
Already.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having us out. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for coming.
Hey.
Hi. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Hey. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having us out.
Play or you can watch this?
Hi. Thanks for being here.
Very exciting day. Thank you.
Good luck, big guy.
Good luck.
Exeter, for those who don't know me.
Good luck.
And I'm also the chair of the Exeter Democrats. I'm excited to be with you today, and I also want to note that we have a couple of state representatives here with us in the audience. So I'd like to recognize them as well. Representative Wendy Thomas from Merrimack. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for coming. And also Representative Mark Vallone from Epping. Hello, hello. Good to have you here. Oh my God, Skip! Hi, Skip! I was looking for you earlier, and here you were right in front of me. Representative Skip Berry, and who I know all of you know. Our own from Exeter. We are lucky this year to have a vibrant primary. Yeah, that's exciting. Since I won't be endorsing a candidate as chair of the town Democrats, I have had the opportunity to meet with many of the campaigns to find out what they're all about. I hope I will get to meet with all of them. I get to talk with them and their staff to find out what makes each candidate a great potential leader for our country. Like me, you probably watched Beto and his campaign for the Texas Senate seat.
Yeah.
His message and the authenticity with which he carried it brought thousands of new voters to the polls. Also, can we cheer for that, please? We want as many of our voters at the polls. Since then, we've seen Beto stand up for families being separated at the border by the inhumane tactics of our current government. I'm sure Beto will bring the same empathy, compassion, and strength of character to this election. I also think that in his time here, not just this weekend, but the many times that he'll come back to visit us, he will extend that same compassion and listening ear and understanding to those of us in New Hampshire who are seeking accessible, affordable health care, quality education across the lifespan, and a solid economic future. So with that, it is my honor today to introduce you to Beto O'Rourke.
How's everybody doing? Good to be with you. Thanks for having us out. Alexis, thank you for the welcome and helping to organize this. I understand that Larry Drake, the Rockingham County Chair, may also be here. Thank you for joining us today and for everything that you are doing, along with Alexis and everybody else out here, making New Hampshire, making Exeter, making Rockingham County so incredibly proud, and setting some very high standards for the rest of the country. I understand that despite the action of your governor, your state legislature, which you put into office and into positions of public trust, passed family leave for this state. We need to be able to follow the lead for every single family in this country, every single parent able to take time off to take care of their kids or themselves or their folks without losing income or their job or the means to provide for themselves or their families. Or what if we decided that no American would have to work more than one job in order to get by, and we had a minimum wage of $15 an hour as the floor for everyone in this country. Couple that with affordable childcare so that you're able to have the time to go pursue your potential, either finish your schooling, work that job, start a business, write a poem, create a masterpiece of art, run for public office, whatever you were placed on this planet to be able to do. I want to make sure that you have access to the means, to the job, to the protections, to the education to be able to do that. And then this year, 2019, in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, ostensibly the greatest democracy the world has ever known, it is worth noting and remembering that women in this country today are making 80 cents on the dollar for what a man makes, that African American women are making 61 cents on the dollar of what a man makes, and Latinas 53 cents on the dollar for what men make. So in addition to a minimum wage coupled with paid family leave, coupled with childcare, coupled with universal, guaranteed, high-quality care, let's ratify the Equal Rights Amendment so that every woman is treated equal to every man in every single community, in every workplace, in every single part of this country. I think we can follow your lead in that way as well. Ayer celebramos Día de las Madres. Tomorrow we will celebrate Mother's Day. And I want you to think about something that Alexis alluded to in her introduction. That right now, we have mothers arriving at our front door at the Texas-Mexico border who have traveled 2,000 miles, leaving some of the deadliest places on the face of the planet today. Doing what Amy and I would do if the only way to save the lives of our kids, Ulysses, who's 12, Molly, who's 10, Henry, who is 8 years old, was to make a similar journey for their lives and for their sake to come to a country that has defined and distinguished itself by being a country of refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants from the world over. And the way that we have welcomed so many of those families, so many of those moms over the course of this administration is to deport them back from the very country from which they fled in the first place, to take that child for who she risked her life and place them in a cage and then in custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement within Health and Human Services, and then perhaps onto a foster care home in literally God only knows where in America, separating those families for the foreseeable future, perhaps forever. And Amy and I have been there in El Paso, thanks to Annunciation House, an extraordinary Catholic charity that has facilitated some of these reunions for families who are lucky enough to be reunited. And instead of the look of joy and impatience and excitement that describes Henry, our 8-year-old's face when we come home from a trip like this one, his desire to tell us everything that he's done and seen and watched, the new friends that he has made, instead of tears of joy rolling down her cheeks or a big goofy smile like the one that we see on the faces of our kids, those children who have not seen their mothers for months show absolutely nothing. Absolute vacant expression, perhaps an inability to connect with the one person with whom they associate the greatest pain and suffering a child could possibly experience. And perhaps somehow, unconsciously, they've decided that they will never again open themselves up to that kind of pain. And it will be a very long time, if it is ever, that they connect with that person, the most important person in their life. And I know you know this, but it bears repeating, that though this was a decision of one man, of one political party, for as long as we are a democracy, the people are the government, and the government is on the people, this responsibility to change this rests on the shoulders of every single one of us, lest it define us forever. You may know the story of the St. Louis, which in 1939 set sail from Hamburg, Germany with more than 900 Jewish refugees aboard, children, women, men, bound for Cuba, an asylum and refuge from the Third Reich. And as they were crossing the Atlantic, Cuba changed its asylum laws. By the time that they got to Havana, they were unable to leave that ship and set sail for the United States of America, where they were refused permission to be able to dock and to unload those passengers. And the captain of that ship, a voyage that has been described as the voyage of the damned, tried to run aground in Florida. So desperate was he to be able to ensure that these refugees could live and survive in this land again of refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants. And though it was one man of one party, Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the time, of the Democratic Party, who refused them the ability to come to this country and sent them back across the Atlantic, where more than 250 of them would be killed during the Holocaust, children, women, and men. That is a decision that stains this country's conscience forever. The year now is 2019. The decision is upon every single one of us. The urgency must be felt in meetings like these, in the conversations that we have with our elected representatives, in the courage that you showed, those of you who literally came down to Tornillo, Texas, an hour outside of my hometown of El Paso, in the Chihuahuan desert, where we were warehousing these kids that we had taken from their parents in tent camps, with no prospect of being free or seeing their families or knowing what is next for them in their lives. Within 24 hours after we knew that these tent camps were being erected, we sent out a call to action to the United States of America, and more than 1,000 of you came down to El Paso from as far away as New England, from as close as Las Cruces, New Mexico, to bear witness, to testify, to tell our fellow Americans what was being done in our name. And that action, at that moment, helped to ensure that this administration, before any election was called, any new representatives were elected, ended the policy of separating kids from their families. So I know that this works, and that if we band together and form the public pressure that determines the political will, we can get this administration, with every resource in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, to reunite those families that are separated today. So as we celebrate Mother's Day tomorrow, let's not just think of the mothers in our lives here in New Hampshire or back home for me in Texas. Let's think about all those moms in El Salvador, in Guatemala, in Honduras, who do not know where their kids are today in the United States of America, and our opportunity in this great democracy to make sure that we make it right for all of them. You with me on this? We can do this. We will do this. We have this opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to set this country right again, to get back on this course. As we were coming in, someone showed me the platform, if I have this right, next to this yellow house on a hill, where the Declaration of Independence was read to the citizens of Exeter 243 years ago. This premise, which is a mind blower in the course of human history and civilization, that this nation would not be defined by race or ethnicity or common ancestry or genealogy, but this idea that we are all created equal, perhaps to equal opportunity, and the ability to reveal our genius to one another for this country, be the example for the world despite our differences. And today we say, no me importa, I do not care to whom you pray, or whether you pray at all, who you love, and I sure hope you love somebody, where you live in this country, how many generations you can count your family an American, or whether you just got here this morning. All that matters at this moment, with these challenges before us, with this opportunity that is present in our lives, is that we are Americans first, before we are anything else. And so to meeting these asylum seekers, not with cages and not with walls and not with this inhumanity, but with a generosity and a rule of law that has defined this country for the last 243 years, to rewrite this country's immigration laws today that keep more than 1 million dreamers, every bit as American as anyone else here in this park today, living in a constant fear of deportation back to a country whose language they do not speak, where they no longer have family or connections, where if we nonetheless send them back there and they are successful, their success will benefit that place, those communities, that country, not this place, not New Hampshire, not the United States of America. If we decided, and all it takes is us defying the expectations of our differences, so make this not about Democrats or Republicans or independents or families of immigrants, make this about Americans, and decide that we will make them U.S. citizens here in their home country. We will do it not at the price of deporting their parents, the original dreamers, or their siblings, or the millions more who in so many instances have been here for decades, working the toughest jobs available in the United States of America, sometimes for a minimum wage, sometimes well below a minimum wage, kept in some kind of modern bondage, their immigration status used as leverage against them, while all of us, wittingly or not, benefit from the fruits of their labor. Bring them out of the shadows so that they can contribute to their full potential for themselves, for their families, and yes, for this country as well. We can do that together. Rewrite our immigration laws in our own image, reflect our values, our interests, our future. We can take what we have heard through the town halls that we have held all over this country. Folks who cannot afford their prescription medication, though they are insured. One woman in New Hampshire on our first visit pushed across the table a receipt for her prescription. After her copay kicks in, it totals $10,000 a year. So she rations her medication. She's supposed to take 3 pills a day. She takes 1 or 2. That's all she can afford. Diabetics rationing their insulin are not able to afford it at all, despite the fact that it was invented 97 years ago by scientists in Canada who sold it to the Canadian government for $3. 3 Canadian dollars at that. With no prospect to profit off of something that would save the lives of their fellow human beings. And yet in this country, in this year, people consumed by diabetes because they cannot afford insulin. Folks dying of the flu, incurable cancers, not in a country that lacks or wants for resources or medical technology or the cures and medications that you and I as taxpayers paid for, at least the research and development in the first place, only to have them sold back to us at the most expensive rates on the planet. No, all that we lack is the political will to bring this country together, to make sure that every single one of us is well enough to live to our full potential, well enough to contribute everything we've got to the greatness of this country, well enough because we can afford prescription medications, we can see a primary care provider. Those with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, clinical depression, so often meeting their family members who tell us that they're taking themselves to an emergency room because there's the one place that they can count on to get care in some communities. Met with a group called NAMI in San Antonio, advocates, fierce advocates for those who need to be able to see mental health care providers, and explain that in one hospital, one man showed up 40 times over the course of 1 month, racking up a bill of $38,000 that he's in no position to pay for. But the taxpayers in Bexar County and San Antonio will, or if you are lucky enough, and that's all you are if you have insurance today, if you're lucky enough to have insurance, it will be reflected in your premiums, in the size of your deductible, in the amount of your copays. In my home state of Texas, and unfortunately in other states in this union as well, the largest provider of mental health care services today is the county jail. The largest inpatient mental health care facility in a state of 28 million is the Harris County Jail. People are getting arrested on purpose to go to the places that can care for them, feed them, clothe them. at exorbitant rates for you and for me as taxpayers, $110 a night. Imagine this, for a fraction of the cost, world-class outpatient mental health care services for every American. Universal guaranteed high-quality health care means that you no longer have to take yourself an emergency room at the end of your life where the outcomes are not going to be as good as they would have been otherwise, and the care is many times more expensive. Universal health care means that you can afford to take care of yourself, and universal health care means in a country today where a woman's right to make her own decisions about her own body is constantly under attack and under threat, that in states that are closing down Planned Parenthood clinics and reproductive planning clinics, meaning not only can women not get in those places access to a safe, legal abortion, they cannot get the cervical cancer screening or the family planning help or the ability to see a provider of any kind that would save their lives. And it may help explain how this country is in the midst of a maternal mortality crisis today, 3 times as deadly for women of color. So universal care has to mean primary care, mental health care, and every woman making her own decisions about her own body with the access to the care that allows her to do that. We can come together and make that happen as well. One of the things that's hard for me to understand, hard to explain to my kids, is the disconnect between your license plate, live free or die, and the fact that in this country, we imprison more of our own than on any other in this planet. 2.3 million of our fellow Americans behind bars right now as we enjoy this glorious spring day under this beautiful sky, able to participate together freely in our democracy. It's the largest prison population on the face of the planet, and it is disproportionately comprised of people of color. Far too many there doing time for a non-violent drug crime, including possession of marijuana, something that's legal or decriminalized or medicinalized in the majority of the states in this country. And yet we are arresting some, more likely people of color than white. Even though Americans of all races use marijuana at the same rate, only some are more likely than others to be stopped, to be frisked, to be arrested, to be jailed, who upon release will be forced to check a box on every employment application form saying that they have this conviction, making it less likely that they get work going forward, no longer qualify for federal loans, unable to pursue their potential through higher education, consigned to narrowed options and choices and futures. That's you and that's me doing this to one another today. So in order to meet this challenge, we must not only end the war on drugs that has become a war on people, and some people more than others. We must not only end the prohibition on marijuana at a federal level forever, we must not only expunge the arrest records of those caught for possession of something that is legal in so much of the rest of this country. That only begins to get at the deeper challenges that go beyond that, or ending prisons for profit or cash bail. All of those are criminal justice reforms that we must lead on. But we must acknowledge the deeper racism, fundamental and foundational to this country, that is with us in every single aspect of American life. I mentioned the disparity in maternal mortality outcomes in this country. For infant mortality, it is even worse. The difference between white and black infant mortality in America in 2019 is greater than it was in 1850, 15 years before the abolition of slavery. There is 10 times the wealth in white America today than there is in black America. In a kindergarten classroom where that kid is 5 years old, she is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled than a white kid in the same classroom in front of the same teacher. That jailhouse from schoolhouse pipeline begins not in high school, but at the most vulnerable age for kids who have no idea what they were born into and what they face going forward. So criminal justice reform is important, but it only begins to get at the deeper problems that we have in this country If we are willing to face the legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and suppression and everything that comes with it and is still with us to this day, infecting our very democracy, where in states like mine, Texas, 50th in voter turnout, not because we love our democracy less than you do here in New Hampshire, but because we were drawn that way by our state legislature. Depending on your race or your ethnicity or your country of national origin, you were drawn out of your representative district to diminish the power of the vote and the likelihood that your voice would ever be heard. You couple that with voter ID laws that say that you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you cannot use your student ID at El Paso Community College to prove who you are at the ballot box. Then you understand this is not by accident, but this is by design. If we are willing to confront this, to own it, to tell the full American story when we're telling the American story, then we will begin the process of repair, and we will stop visiting these injustices on the generations that follow. And I want this country to come together to do that as well. I don't know if there are any members of Exeter Orange here, but I was learning about this organization, much like those that we found in El Paso, students leading the charge against gun violence in America. Those who led the walkouts from their classrooms, the marches for our lives, who come to meetings like these and confront people like me and ask, what are you going to do about the fact that more than 30,000 of our fellow Americans will die by gun violence this and every year going forward until we change course? Why is it that Kendrick Castillo, in that community just outside of Denver, felt like he had to run towards, not away from the gunman, to save the lives of his fellow classmates in that high school? Why was it that Riley Howell, the week before at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte, did exactly the same thing? Was it because they felt that this was inevitable and they had already planned what they would do once that gunman entered their school? Why does our youngest, Henry, come home from first grade and tell us about his teacher, who already sacrifices so much for him and his classmates, who is so underpaid in Texas, likely working a second or a third job? Why is she conducting an active shooter drill and contemplating making the ultimate sacrifice for Henry and his fellow classmates? Why have we not found the political will to universally adopt universal background checks, which in those states that have passed them have seen a 50% reduction in gun violence? Why do we continue to sell weapons that were designed and engineered and originally sold to the United States military because they're very effective and efficient at killing people in very great numbers? Why do we sell them into our communities and then are surprised when they show up in our schools, in our synagogues, in our churches, in our concerts, in our public life, and take the lives of those in our lives? Why do we not adopt red flag laws so that those who are exhibiting a tendency towards harming themselves or harming somebody else in their lives or our lives can be stopped before it's too late? We've got to follow the lead of those young people who are forcing the conversation, who are shocking the conscience of this country, and it should have been shocked long before now, to ultimately do the right thing and stand up to the NRA, to the political action committees, to the gun lobby, to those members of Congress who fear their next election more than they fear the judgment of history and their children. We've got to come together on this as well. And then lastly, the biggest challenge of them all, for all of us, but especially the youngest among us, this planet is cooking a degree Celsius just since 1980, and it was not caused by God, nor by Mother Nature, but by you and by me and every single one of us. Our emissions, our excesses, our consumption, our inaction in the face of the facts and the science and the truth. We were just in Iowa along the Missouri River, which has seen record flooding because there's record runoff into the Missouri River Basin, 4 times that of a normal year, and the greatest runoff for as long as we've been keeping records of the Missouri River. Pacific Junction, a town that had never in any meaningful way flooded in its entire history, was completely underwater. Every single home and building drowned. Every single thing in it gone forever. And as we are touring some of these homes, the homeowners in these hazmat suits and masks mucking them out as the mold grows on the walls, we're learning that in Davenport, the other side of the state in Iowa, along the banks of the Mississippi, has just seen record flooding there as well in the same year, shattering the record set in 1993. In my home state, Houston, Texas, 2017, 58 inches of rain fell from the sky in a single storm, which is a landfall record for as long as we've been keeping them in all of North America. And it was the third 500-year flood in just one community. The fires that we've seen in California, preceded by epic, record-breaking droughts, infestations of beetles that turn those trees into tinder, consume not just property, but the lives of those living in that state and the firefighters and heroic first responders who tried to meet that challenge. But no firefighter, no one of us, no person can meet this challenge, because we understand that on this trajectory, these fires, these droughts, these floods, these storms are going to get exponentially worse going forward. The places that we live in and call home today will no longer support human life. Entire cities will be washed away going forward. But the scientists say we've got 10 years within which to act, to change course, and to try to get this right, or at least make it better for the people of the future who will follow us in these communities and on this planet. If we can free ourselves completely from a dependence on fossil fuels, if we can make those communities in the front lines of climate change resilient against the disasters, human-made, not God-made, that are coming their way, if we can lead the investment on the technologies and the innovation and the ingenuity that will free this world from a hell and a disaster that awaits it unless we change course right now, and if we allow farmers and those in rural communities to be in the driver's seat, to not only grow the food upon which we depend and which feeds not just this country but the entire world, but to, at a profit, be able to grow cover crops that pull more carbon out of the air, inject more of it into the soil, use precision and no-till farming to disturb less of it while it is there, pay them to conserve more of their land, to do the public good for every single one of us. In other words, if we meet this challenge, not with half steps or half measures or with only half the country, if all of us do everything within our power and set the example, we can once again return to our role as the indispensable nation, convene the other powers of the planet to make sure that all of us are doing their part, and then maybe, just maybe, we can keep this planet from warming 2 degrees Celsius, after which it is very hard to get it back for these and other children and grandchildren and generations yet to come. This is a tall order in a divided, polarized country. More afraid, more angry, kept further apart than we've ever been, at least in my lifetime, maybe in yours as well. But I have some cause for optimism. Coming from Texas, in a race that we ran in every single one of the 254 counties, no matter how big or blue, we didn't take you for granted. We showed up to listen to you, to find out what was on your mind. No matter how red or rural or small, we did not write you off. We could care less who you voted for last time. We wanted to find out what we could do together going forward for the future. We visited places that are not the reddest counties in Texas, but the reddest counties in the United States of America. Voted for Donald Trump 96% in the last election, but I hope you agree, every bit as deserving of being heard, of being listened to, of being fought for, of being served. And so we showed up. And though we ended up, at the end of the election, at the end of the night, 2.6% down, we helped 2 other Democrats win their congressional races, helping to flip the House of Representatives so they could better reflect the will and the interests of this country. We changed the composition of our state legislature. 17 African American women won judicial elections in Harris County, changing criminal justice in our most diverse city in the United States. We won more votes than any Democrat in the history of the state of Texas, won independence for the first time in 10 years, and 500,000 Republicans who voted for the most conservative governor in the country, or at least one of the most conservative governors in the country, voted for us on the same ballot. And we never had to trim our sails or show up with anything less than the courage of our convictions, talking the same way here as we did in those small, rural, red counties, showing that there's a way to defy the differences and unite this country around our common challenges, and to ensure that we will not be known in future generations by our pettiness, by our meanness, by our fear, but instead known forever after by our ambitions, our aspiration, and the work, and the resolve, the service, and the sacrifice we are willing to bring to bear in order to get them done. That's what brought me out here today, to be with you. I hope that's what brought you out here, to be with each other, and looking forward to working with you going forward for this country. Thank you all very much. Gracias. Muchas gracias. Y atrás tenemos la señorita Cano with the microphone. She will bring that to you if you raise your hand. Would love to bring you into this conversation and hear what's on your mind. Sir.
O'Rourke, you clearly are a dedicated and caring person, sacrificing so much to care for your nation. And everything I would expect from a young man who chose the pain of rowing over the easy roll of, let's say, golf at Columbia. Here's my question. Clearly, the president incumbent has done everything possible to wreck the world order that has preserved us, the world, since 1945. What do you plan to do immediately if president to restore that world order?
Thank you, sir. This world order, forged in sacrifice, young men who left this town in the 1940s to go fight the existential threat to Western democracies, many of them giving their lives in the process, purchased the peace and the ability to make this world safe for democracy for the following 75 years. Our president, turning his back on those alliances, those friendships, and those relationships, those other democracies, to embrace strong men and dictatorships across the world, to invite a foreign power into our democracy in 2016, to cover up the investigation, to protect the sanctity of the ballot box and our ability to freely choose those who will represent us and our interests. And as the Mueller report is released, one of the first phone calls he makes is to Vladimir Putin to describe this as a hoax, inviting more of the same going forward and leaving us, at least from our commander-in-chief, defenseless. Embracing MBS in Saudi Arabia as he bombs the daylights out of the civilians in Yemen, making us functionally a co-combatant in that war. Erdogan in Turkey, al-Sisi in Egypt, Duterte in the Philippines. And we give the back to the European Union, to the Americas, to our closest allies over these last 80 or 75 years. So if we're going to meet the challenges that I just described, global warming, chief amongst them, we're going to need to renew all of these friendships and partnerships, convene the powers of the planet together to make sure that we get it right while we still can. We're going to make sure that we achieve our goal of nuclear disarmament and stop the spread of nuclear weapons. We're going to need all of these partners and friends. If we're going to exit the wars that we are in today, in our 18th year in Afghanistan, we're going to need these partners and friends. And if we're going to answer the question on the minds of those around the world today, is the future a democratic one or an autocratic one? We have to make sure that we signal abroad and at home that democracy is important to us and every single vote counts. So all of this is critical, and the next administration must fully embrace it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, slight left. Go. a question. My name is Kyla, and I'm wondering how you can speak so passionately about issues like healthcare and climate change when you previously voted against the Affordable Care Act and received many campaign donations from oil.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. We may see the premise of your question a little bit differently. I've not taken a single dime from a single political action committee for 5 years of any stripe or kind. No corporate help, no special interest contributions. This campaign accepts no money from lobbyists, and we've signed the fossil fuel pledge, meaning that we don't take money from CEOs and executives of fossil fuel companies. I voted to support the ACA and expand the ACA. My proposal, Medicare for America, says that every uninsured American is able to enroll in Medicare. Every insufficiently insured American who cannot afford the insurance they have can enroll in Medicare. And those who have employer-sponsored insurance and like it because it works for them and their families, or the members of unions who fought for their insurance plan at the expense sometimes of higher wages, they're able to keep those as well. It is the surest, fastest path to get to universal, guaranteed, high-quality care. And of all the 21 presidential candidates, we have released the most comprehensive, the boldest plan to make sure that we confront the challenge of climate change before it is too late. So thanks for the question. Appreciate it.
Another left.
Yep.
Keep going a little
Here
bit.
we go.
Hi Beto, my name's Scott. I was an early supporter of you from afar in Texas and contributor, and so we're blessed with a wealth of candidates, and lots of them coming through New Hampshire this weekend. So how do we decide? Because it's some of the most competent group of representatives and senators and governors and mayors that I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah. What a great problem to have. You're right that this is the most extraordinary field, maybe in our country's history. It's a good sign, not just for the Democratic Party, but for democracy in America today. And this is exactly the kind of problem that we want to have, right? We want this to be a competition of ideas, of track record, of vision, the means that we explain that will help us to get to the goals that we want to achieve. All I can tell you is, beyond what I've shared with you today, the fact that this country is so focused, for whatever reason, much of it owing to the president's racism and paranoia and xenophobia, on the US-Mexico border. That's precisely where Amy and I are raising our kids. We're able to personally tell a very powerful story about the role of immigration and immigrants and asylum seekers in the success and the safety of our communities. Having run the campaign that I just described in what was thought to be a very red state, and finding a way to bring people together by not writing anybody off. And then 6 years in Congress, every single day of it in the minority, we were able to get things done by finding common cause with Republican colleagues, expanding access to mental health care for veterans at a time that 20 a day, every day, are taking their lives in this country, protecting public lands in Texas at the time that this administration was diminishing the size of public lands across the country, and investing in our ports of entry that bring us closer to Mexico, facilitate legitimate trade and travel, and add to the safety and security of our communities. So I hope to demonstrate to you that I'll work anytime, anywhere, with anyone to advance this country's agenda. It's the way that I've served, it's the way that I'm campaigning, and it's the reason that I'm here with you today. Thank you for the question. Appreciate
Great.
it.
I'm behind you, behind the chairs. A little bit more to your right. There we go.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for taking my question. I live in Merrimack, which is in southern New Hampshire, and we have an industrial polluter who is on a daily basis, they're not stopping, they're pouring PFAS chemicals into our town. We've got people who are sick. I have a private well that is so contaminated I cannot use the water from my well. Who do you think is going to buy a house that you can't use the water? So what I would like to hear from you is, how are you going to hold polluters accountable, and how are you going to beef up the EPA so that it actually protects us?
Thank you for sharing this, and I've been hearing about water quality and PFAS everywhere I go in New Hampshire, and it will not surprise you that I hear about water quality issues everywhere I go across the country. I was just in the Central Valley of California, where we grow so much of the food upon which we depend, and ironically or perversely, some of the dirtiest water anywhere in the country, connected to the way that we grow our food sometimes in this country. Some of the dirtiest air. 47% of our fellow Americans live in communities where the air is not safe enough to breathe. So I grew up in El Paso, as I shared with you. We have a 100-year-old copper smelter called a Sarco that was belching every single kind of toxin you can imagine into our neighborhoods, onto our front lawns, into the Rio Grande River, across the river into Ciudad Juarez. It's on the city council at the time that we tried to stop their application for a permit to continue to use a Sarco and do exactly what you just described happening here in New Hampshire. Try as hard as we could. We were up against a stone wall in the state of Texas's Environmental Regulatory Commission, which I would argue was beholden and captured by the very interests that they were supposed to regulate. And so I really felt, and our community felt impotent in the face of that. What way out was there? To the rescue rode the EPA under the Obama administration. And though we were unsuccessful at a municipal regulatory level, at a state regulatory level, the EPA came in and, enforcing clean air and water standards, closed a Sarco down, did their best despite corporate malfeasance where they declared bankruptcy so they wouldn't have to clean up 100 years of toxins and waste in one of the poorest urban counties in the United States of America, to exact in those bankruptcy proceedings every cent possible to ensure that we protected the health and the welfare of my fellow El Pasoans. So when I go to counties in Texas, and there are 50 water systems in Texas where it's unsafe to drink the water. When I go to the Central Valley, when I go to Denmark, South Carolina, which is next to Norway and Sweden, South Carolina. I don't know all of my U.S. history. There may have been a Viking invasion at some point. They've been treating their water system for 10 years with something akin to a pool cleaner. It has infected all of the infrastructure. It'll take $15 million to correct that. The taxpayers in Denmark don't have the resources to do that. The state, for whatever reason, maybe because it is a remote rural community, has refused to pay for it. That's where you want the federal government to step in and make sure that whether you live in Flint or New Hampshire or Texas or the Central Valley or Denmark, that you can turn the faucet on and drink what comes out of that. So a massive investment in infrastructure, and there's about $4 trillion of outstanding infrastructure needs, including water, and then holding corporate polluters responsible for what they do. In our administration, day one, not only will we ensure that no new leases for oil and gas drilling are permitted along the eastern seaboard or on our federally protected lands, we will also make sure that existing leases and purchasing agreements reflect the cost of pollution and of carbon to our environment and to our planet. It's the only way that we're going to make sure that those who created the problem actually fund the cleanup that is necessary going forward. So thank you for asking that question. Really appreciate it.
We're near the path you walked in.
Okay.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
My name's Jonah. I wanted to follow on a question you asked earlier about there being so many candidates. It's pretty likely that there's going to be more than one candidate that many of us would support. How do you feel about ranked choice voting?
This is a good question. So to bring everyone up to speed, and I recently had to be brought up to speed on this because we don't have it in Texas. You choose not just your first choice, but perhaps your second and your third. And it in some ways is in practice today in Iowa, right? During the caucuses, if you don't muster enough support on caucus night, you move over to another camp. Yeah.
Maine does it. Maine.
And Maine, yeah. I didn't know that. No, that's why I show up for these things.
We're jealous of Maine.
I think there is a lot to that. And I love the preamble to your question. We've got all these great candidates running right now. We've got to do everything in our power not to demean or denigrate or weaken them or compromise them in any way that would make them anything less than the strongest possible candidate against Trump. And so ranked choice voting provides another inducement to making sure that you don't do that to those other candidates, because by doing so, you anger or upset their supporters, and you're going to want their help at the end of the day. So we're trying to do that anyhow in our campaign. We try never to talk about the other candidates unless we're elevating them and talking about how excited we are about them. But it would not hurt in this very divided, highly polarized democracy to employ that as a matter of course going forward. So thanks for raising this question. Appreciate it. Yep.
Time for 2 more.
Here we go. Hi.
Hi, I'm Jillian. So for most of our country's history, all but 8 years, the country has been led by white men, and this year in such a diverse democratic field, why do you, a white man, think that you should get my vote for the primary?
Thanks for asking the question. So the very direct answer is I don't. I don't think, nor do I feel entitled to anyone's support or vote. I hope to earn it by describing to you the vision that I have for this country that is informed by meeting people like you and incorporating their stories and what I've learned and what I've heard and what I think this country can do and the way that we'll achieve it by bringing all of us together. I was asked a similar question earlier, what distinguishes you from some of the other participants? Ultimately, that is your decision to make. I agree with the characterization of the field, the historic opportunity that we have personified in some of the candidates who are running, and I just count myself lucky enough to be among them. I think, perhaps speaking for many of us here, maybe all of us, we all want to do everything we can at this defining moment of truth for this country, and really, when it comes to climate, for the planet. And for me, doing this, being here, facing your questions and accountability and ultimately your judgment and decision at the ballot box is the most that I can do at this moment. But my commitment to you is, if I am not your choice, if I do not become the nominee, I'm going to do everything in my power to make that nominee successful, not just against Trump, which is critical, but successful in bringing this country together in January 2021. So I'm on all the way, fully on the team for whatever it takes. Thanks for asking the question.
We're by the path again, and this is going to be our last question.
Okay.
Hi Beto, thanks for coming and it's good to see you again. My name's Jordan, I'm from the University of New Hampshire. As you may know, the University of New Hampshire students pay one of the highest in-state tuitions in the entire country. And so I'm wondering if you support free public education for all. If so, does that extend to formerly incarcerated students, immigrants, and how would you pay for it?
Yeah. Great questions. Thank you for being here. One of the things that I've learned through our many visits to New Hampshire, many town halls like these, is that the people in this state have the highest level of student loan indebtedness in the country. And the average right now, I think, is $40,000 per graduate, which is just an average, meaning some have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars more. So the answer to this is twofold. One, stop digging the hole and adding to the problem. Make community college free. Make higher education beyond that debt-free. And then for those who are repaying some of the $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt, at a minimum, refinance that debt at much lower rates, at the same rates that banks lend to one another. And then maximally, if you're willing to dedicate some part of your life to public service, so public education in an underserved community, working one of the unfilled 45,000 clinical positions in the VA for veterans who are waiting too long for care, in some way serving your country, let's wipe clean and clear that debt so that you can focus on delivering your best for the United States of America. Yeah. You ask how to pay for this. Important question. I hope that decades from now, people of the future looking back on this generation will not be able to believe that in 2017 and 2018, when we had $21 trillion in debt, all of these other unmet needs, that our country's answer to that was a $2 trillion tax cut that flowed disproportionately to the very wealthiest at a time of record wealth inequality and to corporations who are already sitting on record piles of cash. So if we were to roll back the worst of the Trump tax cuts, the corporate rate, which was at 35 and came down to 21, if we even moved it up to the mid-20s, we would generate hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of the next 10 years. If we were to tax capital at the same rate that we tax income from wages and ordinary income, we would generate even more. If we were to make sure that the very wealthiest in this country could not uninterrupted pass on that wealth to next generations and further exacerbate the inequality that we have in this country, not only will we make this political democracy work a little bit better because we'd have something approaching economic democracy, we'd also have the resources needed to be able to pay for the answer to these challenges that we just described here today. So thanks for asking the question. Thank you, Exeter, for having us out here today. Love being in your community, and we hope to see you back. Adios.